Welcome back to Beantown versus Big Apple Sports. I'm your host, Nico Sylvester, along with my co-host, Reed Becker and Alex Green. Last time we discussed the New York Giants, New York Jets, and the New England Patriots. Today we'll be discussing the New York Knicks, Brooklyn Nets, and the Boston Celtics as we head towards the NBA draft and the free agency. So Alex, what are some possible moves the Celtics could make with the draft pick this year?
So the Celtics for this year's draft, they have three draft picks. They are the 14th pick, the 26th pick, and the 30th pick. So they have three picks in the first round. And personally, as a Celtics fan, I don't see the Celtics using all three of those picks to draft a player. I think if they're going to draft a player, they'll use only one of those picks to draft someone. And they could possibly move one or two of those picks to either trade up in the draft or trade for a player that they need. The Celtics' main needs this offseason are bench scoring, as they had one of the worst bench scoring efficiency-wise last season, and they all need another big man. Tice was a solid big man for us, but we need a solid starting big man. And there are some guys who the Celtics are rumored to potentially be trading for. One of which is Steven Adams. The Thunder are heading toward a rebuild, and so if they would be looking for picks, which the Celtics have plenty of, to give them. Another one is Miles Turner. Miles Turner is in Indiana right now. He's going to be wanting to get paid soon, and the Patriots might not have the money to afford his contract. And then also Victor Oladipo is another person the Celtics have been rumored to potentially trade for. However, the thing with Victor Oladipo is he is on the last year of his contract. So the thing with Victor Oladipo is, would he be willing to stay in Boston? If we trade for him and he's not willing to stay in Boston, then it's kind of a waste because it'd only be a one-year rental.
Reed, let's talk about the Nets. So what's the biggest priority for them for this offseason?
For the Nets this offseason, they have to re-sign Joe Harris and have to make a decision as well with Spencer Dinwiddie. It was also, I believe, expected to be a free agent. So you have to re-sign those guys. But then the other question is, because when they first got Kyrie and Kevin Durant to Brooklyn, the original thought process was that the Nets would be trying to trade for a third star and would be giving up all their trade young players in their trade. But now, considering that there really aren't that much options out there for a third star for the Nets to bring in, Bradley Beal was the big one among Nets Twitter that people thought if Washington was willing to give up. Although now we know that Bradley Beal has said publicly he's willing to stay in Washington and ride it out, even though if they are in a rebuild. So the question now becomes, is a Drew Holiday worth, or LaMarcus Aldridge, are they worth giving up like a Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen, and giving up basically your depth in your rotation for a guy that wouldn't probably make that much big of a difference for who you have already? And then on top of that, you also now have Karis LeVert, who really stepped up his game this season and made a big case to be their third star for when Kyrie and KD do come back. And you have Steve Nash now as the head coach to make sure of who's coming in as their first year. In my opinion, I wouldn't have gone with Steve Nash. I would have gone for someone more experienced like a Ty Lue or Mark Jackson, someone down that road. But I know that a big factor of that was that Kyrie and KD have a relationship with Steve Nash.
Sounds like they have a lot of things to think about this year. So, Alex, who do you say has the upper hand between the Nets and the Celtics?
That's a tough question to answer. I feel like the Celtics and Nets are in good positions. Each team is in good position for a different reason. I feel like the Celtics have the all-around better team and the better all-around squad, whereas the Nets have better star players in Kyrie and KD. Also, I think we'd have to give the coaching advantage to the Celtics as well. Brad Stevens is one of the better coaches in the league, and the Celtics recently extended his contract this past season. So it's a tough question to answer, but I think each team is good for different reasons.
Agree. I think that it just kind of reminds me of like the Clippers-Lakers situation coming into this season, where it was based on the Lakers have the better duo, and then the Clippers had what most people thought is a deeper team. I would say that obviously the Nets have the better duo with Kyrie and KD, but if you look at the Celtics, they have more depth and more experience, honestly. We know that Kyrie and KD, we know that they're really close friends, but we haven't seen them play together, so that chemistry isn't really there yet. So as of right now, I would have to say at least, that the Celtics have the upper hand, assuming, unless as we get into the season and the chemistry is able to mesh, like what happened with the Lakers, that's a different story. But as of right now, I would have to say Boston.
Now, Reed, tell me about the New York Knicks. I mean, what's up with them? What are they thinking for the draft and for the offseason?
So the Knicks need everything, to put it straight. But with the draft, they have the number 8 overall pick. Granted, now for these prospects, we haven't seen them play since February and March because of the pandemic, which shut everything down. But some quick prospects that have been mentioned with the Knicks as possibilities at number 8. You have Cole Anthony at UNC. Granted, Cole Anthony was out a majority of the college basketball season, but if he was healthy, he would have been one of the top prospects in the draft. You also have Isaac Okoro at Auburn, and then Onyeka Okanu, who is from USC. So you have a bunch of different options for the Knicks. Personally, I can't tell you because we haven't seen them play since that far along before the pandemic. But if I had to say something through my gut, I would have to say at least is just Cole Anthony, in my opinion, will probably be dropping, considering that he was out for majority of the season. It might wind up being a Michael Porter situation for him, where he drops because of his injury, and no one knows how well he is, but he could wind up then moving up as the season goes along and proving everybody wrong. But that's where the Knicks stand with the draft.
What do you think? Should they trade for Chris Paul?
So I would say no. You have Chris Paul is entering his final year of his contract, and he's getting up there in age now. So if you were to trade for him, in my opinion, it would be a disaster. It would be a typical move that the Knicks would do that would have their fingerprints all over it. It would be this really would remind me of Derrick Rose when they got him from Chicago, a guy that was towards the end. And was an expiring deal, by the way, and then wound up just leaving. And meanwhile, they didn't make any progress. In fact, they went backwards. This would make me feel how the Knicks would do again if they were to get him, because you would be going backwards with a team that's a young team. It would just be a typical move of the Knicks trying to shoot for the stars and not prepare for like something like what the Nets did when they got Kyrie and KD, when they just rebuilt, had some draft picks and got Karis LeVert because of that, and improved everybody. And because of that, we were able to get the 2 top stars in free agency. But the Knicks will never learn. I just want to say something quickly back on the Chris Paul point, though. We know that the Thunder have reportedly had interest in Kevin Knox, although in my opinion, Kevin Knox is not worthy for someone like Chris Paul. He's basically the same value of a hot dog off the street of Manhattan. But that's for that, yes. But going back to Tom Thibodeau, he is definitely, me personally, I would have preferred for them to get Kenny Atkinson because of what he did in Brooklyn. But Tom Thibodeau is definitely not a bad second choice. I know that there was a lot of concern with how everything ended in Minnesota and what happened with Jimmy Butler. But thinking about it, he ended a really long drought for Minnesota to get into the playoffs. So, and oh, by the way, when he left Minnesota, the Timberwolves went back to reality and didn't make the playoffs. And Jimmy Butler, by the way, you have to put into consideration, has a big ego. So I don't think that's really a fair knock against Tibbs. I think he'll do just fine. He will be the coach that will be able to tell you if Kevin Knox can play, if Frank Ntilikina can play, if RJ Barrett is legit. Now we'll find out.
Anything else to add for the Celtics, or do you think that's all you got?
The one thing I would just really want to add is, in terms of actually signing players in the offseason, the Celtics do not have that much money, since they have money wrapped up in guys like Jaylen Brown and Gordon Hayward, and they'll have to pay Jason Tatum this offseason. So the Celtics do not have that much money in terms of actually signing players in free agency. If the Celtics are to get any players, it would have to be trading Hayward and 1 or 2 of the picks they have for a player. They do not have that much money to go out and sign a star like other teams do.
And reportedly, the Celtics, when they've been trying to get with Miles Turner from the Pacers, from what we've been hearing, reportedly, is that the Indiana Pacers do have interest in Hayward, which is something to keep an eye on.
That's all the time we have for today. Join us next time on Beantown versus Big Apple Sports when we preview and discuss all the latest rumors about baseball hot stove for the Yankees and the Red Sox. Thank you and goodbye.